Thank you so much. All right, well, welcome to our next Oregon Metals Industry Roundtable. I am Jill Teep from PPRC. Welcome, everyone. Today's agenda, we're going to be doing kind of an introduction to pollution prevention tools and green purchasing strategies. And then we'll have a little bit of a roundtable discussion about tools, things that you have used, things that you are interested in using. And hopefully, if you have ideas about things you wish existed, we may have some resources available to point you in the right direction today. And then we're going to be, we're joined by Michelle Gaither, industrial engineer from PPRC, to talk about tools, resources, and technical assistance. She's got a lot of experience going into businesses and talking about what opportunities exist. And so we'll get a chance to see some of the work Michelle has done there. And then she's got a really wide knowledge of different tools and how they've worked out for businesses as well. And then we're going to wrap up our time with a little workshop around using one of these tools, ChemHat, which we'll introduce to you a couple of times during today's session. But it's one of these tools that's really really friendly for the user and is really geared for an employer or an employee that doesn't necessarily have a lot of background knowledge in chemistry or toxicology or any of those things. It's really meant to be something that's kind of a one-stop shop and to kind of get an idea what kind of information exists for folks. So we'll highlight that one today. And we'll wrap up by 11:30. All right, so I'm from the Pacific Northwest Pollution Prevention Resource Center, PPRC, and we're actually gone nationwide now. But we are housed in the Northwest right now and working with partners all over the nation. And we're about practical solutions for economic and environmental vitality. We're also joined with members from Oregon DEQ. And just to reiterate that DEQ is participating today as a technical assistance status. So this conversation is considered non-regulatory technical assistance. Information can be shared without concern of enforcement and will be used to assist with process improvement and implementation of best practices within your facility and industry. And just so we are clear, technical assistance services provided by the department will not result in compliance inspections or other enforcement actions unless there are reasonable cause to believe there exists a clear and immediate danger to the public health and safety or to the environment. And then our goals for these roundtable meetings are to help Oregon's metals manufacturing and finishing industry prevent waste, achieve regulatory compliance, and reduce operating costs while protecting resources. We're here to listen to industry leaders like yourself, understand the needs and the barriers to this kind of work, support implementation of reduced toxics use, and provide technical training and education like these roundtables, and facilitate industry collaboration like these roundtables are helping us get towards. And this is a free voluntary project and a collaboration of a non-regulatory nature with PPRC and Oregon DEQ. And we want to extra highlight today that we have opportunities to help with free non-regulatory technical assistance. And so there's a survey that's going to be in your follow-up email with an opportunity to request that kind of help. I'm just going to do a really kind of brief introduction to some of the pollution prevention tools that are out there. And I decided to take an approach that comes from a little bit of an unlikely source. And we'll come back to this in one second. But P2 tools, what are they? Tools to evaluate and or identify chemicals or products of concern and assist in the assessment of safer alternatives. So why are we talking about this? You know, as we talk about roundtable after roundtable, the businesses have minimal time and resources for these types of assignments and projects. Historically, around P2 tools, nonprofits and academic programs have developed these tools as kind of one-off efforts that don't always talk to each other, and they don't have continued support for upkeep or new development. And given the wide variety of tools, whether the kind of information you put in, the kind of information you pull out, and who's collecting that information, it can be really challenging to quickly identify the right tool for the right job that is currently, and that tool is currently being maintained as well. And today, we're going to do our best to highlight kind of the best, what's really practical, and what's being maintained actively to help you assess chemicals and processes in your workplace. So I kind of mentioned an unlikely source. So I mentioned that I work in the health and safety world. I'm also really passionate about pollution prevention. And I find that while these two worlds don't talk to each other very often, every once in a while there are opportunities to approach them in a holistic way. And so an unlikely source I'm going to use for our framework for this discussion is from OSHA. So I want to say it was about almost 10 years ago now, maybe 8 years ago. A lot of folks in the pollution prevention world came together with folks from OSHA to identify these 7 steps to transitioning to safer chemicals. And it's a framework kind of start to finish about how to approach this effort to transition. And we're going to spend a little time talking about the first 4 steps just to give some context. And we won't finish the whole thing because we could take our whole time just on this topic and diving into all the different tools that exist within these different steps. But I'm just going to highlight a few that particularly get into like kind of those practical decision-making tools or comparison tools. So we're going to kind of focus there within this framework. But I think it's important to know that amongst these tools that exist, there are frameworks that are these big picture ones that about, thinking about from the very beginning, how would I make a change to how would I implement the change all the way through to tools that you're just going to like, I need information about an alternative and just straight shot to that. So we're going to kind of cover all those bases. But again, a framework I think is helpful because it can be difficult to get started on these sort of projects. So step 1 is engage. And we've spent some time in our previous roundtable talking about this specifically around developing a plan where you identify all of your stakeholders. So that first step is who needs to be involved and sitting at that table. Step 2 within engagement is setting goals. What do you want to accomplish from what all the stakeholders together want to accomplish out of this? And then developing a work plan. And that can be really specific to something very quantifiable, to something very, qualitative maybe. Maybe you want to have a different marketing strategy about how you look to your customers or how you made certain reduction choices. Maybe you're looking to make a very specific reduction goal to make sure things like compliance are highlighted. So that's something to think about developing a work plan during that engagement piece where you're getting those stakeholders sitting at the same table and developing that plan. And a tool to discuss here is the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable's 2025 Safer Chemistry Challenge program. And this program has companies to use eliminate or reduce chemicals of concern. And it provides this really simple and useful method for visualizing and operationalizing a company's goal and work plan. So this might be a tool that you can use to kind of get started to lay out where you want to go with this effort. Step 2 from the OSHA 7 steps is to inventory and prioritize. And we're going to spend a little bit more time on this step because it's going to highlight some of the tools we're going to talk about today and actually use a little bit later. So the first part of step 2 is to examine your current chemical use. So we're going to highlight this tool a lot today. It's the Chemical Hazard and Alternatives Toolbox, also known as ChemHat. It helps you rapidly understand the types of health and environmental effects related to a chemical and the strength of those effects, and also the strength of the evidence for the data that's making those recommendations, information on existing case studies for safer alternatives. And this is nice because it's available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And we're going to spend some time playing with this one a little later, so I'm not going to dive deep now, but you can see just from this image that you can use a name or a CAS number to search a chemical, and it'll give you these nice visual cues about what these potential effects are. And they have health effects, environmental effects, different hazards, and then we dive a little bit deeper into suggested personal protective equipment and other things for this chemical. And then you have an idea here as well about how strong the effect is and how strong the evidence is of that effect. One of the harder things in doing this kind of comparison work is where there is strong data available versus where there's not. So that's part of the decision-making challenge. And having a system like this that kind of easily with color tells you how strong that evidence is can be really helpful. I think the other thing I want to mention about ChemHat specifically is that it's really driven for employers and workers to be able to have a view of what they're working with. It's meant to be, you're not meant to be, you don't have to be a chemistry or toxicology expert to use this kind of tool. It's really geared toward people who are working with these chemicals and want to get to know what they're working with on a deeper level. Okay, so another part of this, there's other opportunities to learn about your current chemical use. I want to mention Risk Talks. This is also recommended in the 7-step program from OSHA. And it's a database of over 100,000 chemical substances that provide clear, organized, and concise information on health and environmental risks. And I'd say this one's more database driven. You're going to get a lot of information back out, but it'll be really thorough and it'll have a lot of details to it. So this might be a little bit deeper dive, and it's driven by a more global impact and global information base. So that's something to think about as your operations grow, or maybe you're needing to deal with EU reach impacts or rules, something to think about as your company looks at its needs. And then this tool is available in English and in Spanish. So the other half of step 2 is to prioritize. And this can also be a real challenge because there's a lot of things that go into assessing a chemical or a process, right? So it's just one thing to say it has these effects in aquatic species or in human health or in the environment. But at the end of the day, you've got to prioritize a lot of different choices, right? Maybe it's too expensive to make that choice, even though it might be better for the environment. So how do we start organizing that information? So this tool that we're going to talk about to help identify those priorities and maximize the use of limited resources is the European Commission's prioritization matrix. And for those of you that are familiar with EHS work at all, you've maybe heard of things like control banding to assess hazards. This was going to look familiar to you as a tool that you've maybe seen before. So the risk matrix tool combines qualitative evaluation of hazard and exposure potential to identify chemicals that could be good targets for substitution efforts. So this is just a way to kind of draw out what your priorities really are and a way to see it visually using kind of a control banding method. So step 3 of those 7 steps is identifying alternatives. So what I like about these steps is there are tools built in, but there's also these kind of key questions to get the conversation started about where you want to go. So key questions for identifying these alternatives are there chemical alternatives that may have been implemented in similar applications? Are there material changes or process changes that could replace the use of hazardous chemicals? Are there other businesses that are also seeking safer alternatives for the same chemical or use of the chemical? Are there opportunities to collaborate? And as we've been talking about with this roundtable, this is exactly what we're hoping to create some of that conversation around. What have other businesses learned? How can we learn from each other as we explore these alternatives? So I wanted to mention, so this is hinting at how important case studies and different examples are. So Michelle is going to discuss some other really relevant case studies that I'm excited for you guys to see, but I just want to give you an idea of some of the sources for different case studies that could be relevant. There's lots of different sources for these, and is there one place for all of them? There isn't, but these are a few that definitely have examples that apply to the metals industry, finishing and otherwise. So the Interstate Chemicals Clearinghouse has completed alternatives assessments for you to explore. This can be helpful because it does have like completed laid out information with the data that does exist. So that's a good one to check out. The Massachusetts Office of Technology Assistance has a lot of different case studies, including the one you see down below for stainless steel coatings and their toxic use reduction efforts. So there's some interesting case studies available there. And then the Massachusetts Toxic Use Reduction Institute, TURI, who are going to hear a lot about them today. They have a toxic use reduction case study collection as well. And those are organized by field as well. So by industry, so you'll be able to quickly kind of navigate to what might interest you the most. We mentioned TURI because, over the last 15, 20 years, there have been a lot of groups that have, made headway in this kind of work around alternatives assessment and sharing good examples and best practices. And I would arguably say that TURI is one of the organizations that's really risen to the top as far as well-produced information, well researched and well respected. So, anyone feel free to fight me on that opinion, but just my personal opinion that I think TURI is always a good place to start when you want to find reputable information. And they also, and we'll mention this later, but they also offer a certain level of technical assistance around using their tools, which can be really helpful, especially if you're having a hard time navigating it or kind of finding what you want. They have folks on staff that are extremely helpful doing that kind of work as well. And then I want to also mention that TURI has their hands at a lot of different research projects, and they have a technical research library for if you want to go a bit deeper into recent scientific literature that may or may not be used widespread in the industry, but you want to see what's emerging or what could be emerging or potential partners in emerging technologies. This is a good place to check out. Any questions so far? We doing okay? we're not crashing through the steps too far. We're going to see some of these themes come up as we keep going. So we'll keep going. So the last step I want to dive a little bit deeper into is step 4 about assessing and comparing alternatives. So you've now gone through these first steps. You've got ideas of things you want to at least evaluate. Maybe you have an idea for an alternative, but how do you really kind of make a decision? How do you prioritize these alternatives to further assess, and you actually want to see what it looks like in real time in your experience, in your application. So some things to think about as you go into this comparison step of alternatives is, what are the performance requirements of the chemical or the process? Do specific alternatives present a high risk to the environment and worker safety and health? One thing we talk about is the idea of substitutions that end up being more detrimental in the end, or they're detrimental in a different way. So that's one of those trade-offs to be sure you're not stepping out of one problem into another. What are the safety health criteria, toxicological and physical properties that need to be compared? Will workers experience changes to the performance of their work tasks when using the alternative? This is huge. If workers aren't prepared to accept those changes, it can be a big barrier. Those changes can include engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment changes. Will workers experience changes in exposure when using the alternative? Are we changing the exposure from a different kind of hazard? Will these changes prevent new and different hazards for workers? And then always, a driver, what costs need to be compared? We may identify something that has reduced hazards, but may cost more to dispose of in the end, or other byproducts. So that's something to think about. So one tool I want to mention, again, Turi, I want to mention them again. They're out of UMass Lowell, so they are connected to an academic program, but they're just a really strong nonprofit on their own as well. But one of the challenges can be, taking all this information and kind of driving it into, how do I get to a decision? How do I take all of this data and come out of it on using one of these tools to help make a choice? So the Pollution Prevention Options Analysis System, the P2O Assist, is I believe how you pronounce that. I've always just seen it written. It's a newly released tool. It came out maybe 2 years ago to help companies and others organize information. So you can compare the environmental, health, and safety attributes of chemicals, formulated products, and production process changes. And it's pretty comprehensive, fairly state-of-the-art, and as I mentioned, has support staff available to help with this process. So there's lots of opportunity here to get a really comprehensive view of your impacts. And there's that link there. V, I see your question in the chat. The slides and recordings will get posted, and I will send an email out after the fact that's got a link to our evaluation. It's going to have some notes for follow-up, and it'll send you to the program page where the recording will be posted, but that'll all be sent to you via email.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. And another tool I want to mention at this step 4 is about assessing and comparing alternatives is Green Screen for Safer Chemicals. It's a tool from Clean Production Action. It's a methodology for comparative chemical hazard assessment that can be used for identifying chemicals of high concern and safe alternatives. The Green Screen is very comprehensive. It's really about pulling all of the existing data and using this visual tool to get an idea of what that impact looks like. It's a highly trusted methodology, and it's very data driven. Michelle's going to talk about the Green Screen and show you a sample of what this kind of data output looks like, so you can have an idea of what to think of it. Their methodology includes approved practitioners who complete these comparisons, and then once one of those is blessed, for lack of a better term, there's a growing database of completed green screens available. So there's a kind of I mean, it used to be very few, and now it's up to the thousands of different completed green screens that exist. And there may or may not be something of interest there to work with, but it's really about identifying the comprehensive data that we do have, and then what data we're missing, but in this way that is rigorous and data driven and trusted. So this is just a really brief and top level view of start of this kind of framework we can use to start thinking about transitioning to safer chemicals, with an emphasis on what tools kind of rise to the top. And each one of these stages if you check out the website, there's many tools for all of these stages, but I wanted to try to highlight the ones that I think could be the most useful for you. And you're going to hear about these a little bit later into our conversation as well. I want to mention that we have additional training specifically on the OSHA 7-step framework. So I mentioned I'm from the University of Washington. Our OSHA Training Institute that we also have there offers a class called OSHA 7225, Transition to Safer Chemicals, and it's a 1.5-day training using that framework. And it's been built in conjunction with Oregon DEQ and Washington Department of Ecology, and it's constantly being updated with the newest information. And it started with the framework, but it continues to evolve and grow. And it's very updated for regulations in Washington and Oregon. And then it's offered online and in person. And historically, I don't want to speak for Oregon DEQ going forward, but there have been discounts offered for Oregon and Washington employees and employers who want to send folks to that class. And then I also want to mention that we have a Green Chemistry and Chemical Stewardship online certificate program. It's a 3-course fully online certificate. It dives deeper into the chemistry, toxicology, and business decision-making tools. It's endorsed by the Association for the Advancement of Alternatives Assessment. And course 1 of this begins on September 26th, and I help manage that program. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to let me know. But these are just ways to, if this topic is of interest to you and you want to get some more information about how to use these tools and practice using them, this is something you may want to check out. So I'm going to switch gears just briefly. Are there any questions on that initial piece that I can help answer right now? Great. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit and get a little more specific around green purchasing strategies. And this feels like a little bit of a departure because it's not necessarily part of that framework. We've used our framework to make a choice. And now how do we kind of implement these differences as we go forward? But I think there are some tools that that could be helpful. And I put green here because I think we all know that green is one of those words that get tossed around a lot, particularly in marketing, and can be one of those pitfalls. So that's why I describe it this way. So green purchasing, what is it? Policy or guidelines developed to steer purchasing decisions towards safer and/or more sustainable options. And why are we talking about this? It provides a starting place for considering alternatives. Any one individual may struggle to find enough time, effort, expertise, and guidelines cut down on time spent searching for alternatives. So once you have identified some of these alternatives, this can be a good way to see them implemented in your workplace. Guidance is usually developed by a team within the company that considers input from operators, EHS, purchasing, and others. But guidance may not be realistic to the needs of the operator or process. This is one of those like gives and takes about green purchasing. So I want this section to feel more conversational about the pros and cons of these kind of efforts and how these tools may have good intentions, but sometimes they can leave out important details like the impact to an operator or how a process might be impacted. So we just want to have a conversation about this approach and these kind of tools. So guidance documents often require regular updates to reflect new data, product, or costs, and documents easily fall out of date. I feel like I've seen that happen so many times where a company will adopt a green purchasing program, and then next thing you know, that company has been swallowed up by a bigger company, or that's out of date really fast. So it can be the tricky thing about trying to establish these kind of guidelines or even identifying companies or products, because it changes rapidly in this sort of application. So green purchasing strategies, purchasing guidance often includes information about what metrics were used to create the sort of policy or guideline, and often can include lists of chemicals or products to avoid. Sometimes they're not necessarily telling you what to get, but just things to not get. And so there's use in both of those approaches. So I think we want to talk about some of these examples that are impacted as far as different rule changes. So examples of a list of chemicals and products to avoid. California Prop 65 is one that was updated in 2021 about the regulated substance list. The Safer Products for Washington Act in 2019 that is now going through the promulgation process and input. and then the Oregon end of life rule change that discusses the toxic focus list from DEQ. And with that, I was going to welcome Alex to kind of talk about the toxic focus list and how it can be a helpful tool for making decisions about your workplace.
Thanks, Jill. The toxic focus list is part of DEQ's integrated toxic reduction strategy. And so this is a list that DEQ put together of chemicals that are problematic in one way or the other. And this is a great list to utilize to see if you're using these chemicals. And if you are, look at ways to possibly reduce them, because when a government organization puts them on a focus list, I can tell you that over time, they will probably be regulated in some way, or they might be regulated in some way. But typically when governments put something on a list, it's not because they want you to use them more. So using this list to say, what am I using in my business? Is there a different option? Can I move away from one of these? They're obviously problematic in some way or another. And so using this list to go through your chemical inventory, look at what you have and if you're using any of these, and then finding safer alternatives.
Great. And can you speak a little bit to like how chemicals are removed or added to the list?
So this originally started before I was at DEQ, but it's part of the integrated toxic reduction strategy, which I know over time has updated, and I think there's going to be another update soon. But as you can see, there were some chemicals that were removed in 2020. I know, oh, sorry, Bruce, my sound's a little bad. Let me plug my headphones in then. All right, is this better for you, Bruce?
Keep going, maybe a little bit.
Let me see if I can.
Is that any better? I want to make sure you can hear me.
Oh,
okay.
Infinitely better.
Perfect.
Better.
I don't know what you're doing different, but
got my headphones on. It's nice and close now.
okay.
So yeah, you know, this was done originally, I think in 2012 is when it first started. There's been some updates over time. And DEQ has looked at the chemicals that are out there as a cross media. So meaning air, land quality, so hazardous waste, and water quality programs, and looking at it across all of those programs to say, what kind of impacts are these having across the agency for our view, and across, you know, different businesses use these chemicals and things like that. So really taking a holistic approach to this list instead of just having a list for air quality where there's a problem or a list for land quality. And so we really wanted to bring those together and look at where the chemicals of concern are showing up most.
And as far as let's say I'm using several of these chemicals, now that I know that this is concern, are there resources to help identify alternatives available from DEQ, or are there strategies that you're encouraging people to explore as they see their use on this list?
Yeah, so in the chat, I just dropped a link to DEQ's integrated toxic reduction strategy. So there's some tools and some fact sheets on there, some webinar links and things like that. So folks can check some of those out, get some of that background and find some other ideas. There's 14 actions to complement and support some of your core programs so that you can look at maybe moving away from some of these. But DEQ also offers technical assistance. That's my job. So I would love to come out and look at what you're using currently, you know, maybe partner with PPRC or some other groups if we can, to look at how we can eliminate these from your processes, because a lot of these are problematic, and they're going to be problematic for your staff, for disposal, kind of across the board. And if you can eliminate these from your work, you'll probably be saving some time, money, headaches, all the things. So I'd be happy to help you with that. And, you know, I know there's other folks as well across the agency that can help as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
So as we're talking about these green purchasing strategies, sometimes guidance will include things like preferred vendors or products. And this can sometimes be a little problematic as we don't want to necessarily show preference for a particular vendor or a product per se, but there are trusted labels to keep in mind. So EPA Safer Choice is a good example of this. The pro of a label, of a preferred label like this is that you take out some of the guessing work. There is well-published methodology and data about why certain products have made this label available or have earned the right to have this label or not. One of the cons is that it can feel like there's maybe playing favorites for different companies. This is definitely labels in general, not necessarily EPA Safer Choice. The other thing to think about is that sometimes these eco labels in general can fall out of date quickly and they have limited data. But that's why EPA Safer Choice is one of the better choices. But there are, at one point there was something like, 30 different eco labels out in the world. So it can be a little tricky to know which ones are really trustworthy over time. So again, the one we recommend is the EPA Safer Choice. And then also Design for the Environment has published alternative assessments, which is part of the EPA's project as well to document the kind of decision making and the alternative assessment processes that go into these labels. So it really, there's a lot of data there. You can dive deep as you want to, but know that that label comes from real data. And then around the purchasing strategies, some decision oversight within a company is also part of this purchasing strategy. So, we've been working with different companies that will sometimes set up guidelines that bring in the voices that aren't necessarily people using the product, but that there's other stakeholders and other oversight that could be an opportunity to implement green purchasing strategies within your company. So things like purchasing departments can kind of help steer people to an alternative if one is known and understood that it'll work. There's an example out of Intel and Boeing where they use their EHS departments to kind of regulate materials that are coming in. There's lots of companies that operate that way. So that might be an opportunity to kind of give another level of oversight to the kind of chemicals that are coming in the door. And what's nice about using other stakeholders within the company that may not be your direct user is that it engages those stakeholders across the board and can control costs, because there might be issues with, EHS often has to deal with end of life considerations that maybe the user doesn't necessarily have to. So knowing that that cost is about an overall life cycle, not just what's coming in the door. One of the downsides of this approach is that end operators may have to compromise their needs. So the operators see it one way and they need it to perform in a certain way, but there may be trade-offs that happen as other stakeholders become engaged in that process. So I want to mention a sustainable purchasing program guidance that's from the EPA. There's a lot of resources here and kind of, basically how to build one of these programs from the ground up from the EPA. So this is something to take a look at if you see some value for your company. And then there are local resources on this too. I shared King County. I'm up in the Seattle area, and they have a sustainable purchasing guide that's geared towards the county and city of Seattle as far as the different kind of purchasing strategies they have locally as well. So your jurisdiction may have ideas to share, because often things like waste output are jurisdiction specific. So some of those purchasing choices about overall cost may be impacted by your jurisdiction. So something to think about as you think about developing a program for yourself. So that's kind of my spiel, the pros and cons of green purchasing. It's a lot of kind of things to think about and some tools to get started if you'd like to explore that. So we're going to just take a little break here and kind of open up the floor for discussion about tools. So I think that overall, some tools exist to address a lot of different questions, but they're not always super helpful. And what are tools that you wish existed, but you don't know if they do, or that you wish they would be built? What kind of information are you looking to track that maybe you aren't right now that could be helpful? And then what kind of questions are you looking to answer as you are exploring that transition to safer chemicals? So I guess, any of these questions are open for the floor, but I just want to invite folks who are joining us to maybe talk about if there has been tools that they've used that they found helpful, or where is there a gap where you need a tool that doesn't exist yet. All right, Bruce, I'm going to you to kick us off. Have you used any kind of pollution prevention tools that you have found useful, or are there things that you wish existed that don't yet to your knowledge?
Nothing that's very formal. I guess we're probably kind of unique among the group here because most of the hazards around here aren't so much hazardous substances or chemicals like solvents and whatnot, but things that require steel-toed shoes and hard hats and Carhartts and such as that. We only have one thing here that qualifies us as a large quantity generator for haz waste. And in terms of, well, yeah, things that sort of fit into this overall agenda today are chemicals that are almost de minimis quantities, things that are used kind of like on a maintenance department level, either in maintenance or very limited support functions, but not really in production quantities.
I see.
And if anybody in production, they're always free to bring in pretty much anything they want to trial for a new material or a new process, but they don't get to implement it and get serious about it without first getting approval from the EHS group. So personally, I deal with what leaves the bubble, and our safety guy deals with what stays in the bubble and OSHA exposure issues and so on. And so there's kind of a small committee here that brainstorms on pros and cons of some new material and either approves it or not. So that's been our approach. Not using any formal tools like you've been listing here. I mean, those sound like good resources, but just taking one at a time, case by case basis, and applying common sense or reaching out to vendors or doing whatever seems appropriate among the team to make an intelligent evaluation of something new.
Has that process, has it led to successful changes, that kind of group process?
Yeah, not so much changes for what we're doing as decisions about not shifting our production over to some new material, like a new flavor of sand binder to make our casting molds with and things like that. Because the ones that were being brought in for testing just had too many undesirable concerns about worker exposure or air emissions or other environmental impacts. So we followed the trials closely, but in the final analysis, we built a consensus that just, we shouldn't use that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Bruce. Stephanie, how about you? Are there tools that you've used that have been helpful, or have you found that you wish tools existed that you haven't been able to find as you explore transitioning to a safer chemical or process?
I'm kind of in the same boat as Bruce, where we haven't really used a formal tool, but we kind of we kind of deal with issues as we run into them. And not being able to see into the future and what other issues we might have to deal with down the road. I kind of almost the same exact answer as Bruce had. So.
All right. V, how about you? Any tools you've used or that you wish existed that you haven't been able to use?
So I'm pretty new to this, but I did use a tool. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly or not. It's called the I call it Camel, but
Hmm.
you spell it as CAMEO, chemicals. Um, Basically, this tool is used for predicting the reaction between different kind of chemicals. You
Yeah.
just go in and play around with it, like you add chemicals, because when you do like waste treatment, right? Sometime because we do a
Mhm.
lot of batch treatment, so I need to make sure that there's no side reaction that can cause like explosion or any detrimental incident. So I need to
Mhm.
make sure everything is compatible before I start mixing them in.
Mhm.
So CAMEO is like one of the very good tool that you can mess around with it.
Yeah.
um the A tool that I wish it to be exist is I like I don't know, like a tool that can give you alternative for the chemical you want to substitute, for like a more green chemistry that you might implement in the future. I saw in the slide, I think you have a tool that recommend alternative chemicals, but
Mhm.
I don't remember which one.
Yeah.
I just wrote down a bunch of tool, but I didn't write down the feature. So that's why I need the slide
Yeah,
to
no.
post it.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about it a little bit more as we keep going too. So I think that'll become clear. But there are several tools that do provide suggestions of alternatives if they are available. So there's a few of those, and I think we'll spend a little more time on that. But absolutely, that's really the question everyone really has, right? What are those proven alternatives, and what has the data to back it up? And so it can minimize the amount of like work I've got to do on it. So that's the gold ring everyone looks to do. And there are some resources like this, and again, they all have their limitations and expertise, so we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. And I have also played with some of the predictive toxicology tools, and they are really fascinating, right? So it looks at these functional groups and the existing, they often will use different aquatic species that data is based off. Using those functional groups, you can kind of get an idea of like what may have similar reactivity or impacts. So I love that sort of stuff. It's
Yeah.
like it really dives deeper, and it's a way to like, it turns out that doing full toxicological studies on an aquatic species takes a lot of time, it's expensive. So the more you can use these predictive tools to identify alternatives, it's a win-win across the board. So I'm excited to hear tools like that are being used by folks.
Yeah.
Okay, and Dave, I know you joined us after we got started. You want to just tell us your name and where you're from, and then if you are been using any tools yourself or tools you wish existed.
I think Dave might have
Dropped
dropped
off?
off.
Oh,
Yeah.
no. Okay, sorry. We had Dave with us for a moment. All right, great. Well, we'll sorry about that. We'll go ahead and move on. Thank you for sharing, everybody. Appreciate that. Okay, and now we're going to welcome Michelle to talk about some more tools and resources and experience with providing technical assistance to different businesses. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great conversation. Great set of tools. Thanks, Jill. So I'm going to share some additional ideas and tools with you today, and then I hope to demonstrate some technical assistance examples as an option for manufacturers and also the service sector, such as like the auto repair, auto body, and landscape architects and contractors. So I'm not going to talk about landscape, but the premise is that technical assistance can be broadly applied, not just in the manufacturing sector. Next slide. Thank you. So I'm not going to talk about green teams because that was a subject of a previous roundtable. But I'm going to talk about self-assessment checklists, best practices, things you can find online, all kinds of resources, process mapping, a little bit about data monitoring, how to identify hazards. This will go a little bit deeper maybe than what Jill talked about, and then walkthroughs, treasure hunts, and assessments, either by your internal green teams or externally from utilities, and other non-regulatory service providers such as Oregon DEQ or PPRC, and I'm sure there are others as well. Next slide, please. This is a really old metals checklist, metals finishing checklist, still relevant, basic operations wise. I don't think it really discusses things such as alternatives to hex chrome or use of PFAS-based fume suppressants and stuff like that, which I think may have come out after this was actually published. And this example checklist doesn't give a huge amount of detail on any particular opportunity, but you can go through the list and then try to research. Well, okay, I want to extend my drip time. Okay, let's see what other people are doing or how can I do that? And there's all kinds of case studies and YouTube stories online typically, and also totally everyone is welcome to contact PPRC or Oregon DEQ for better ideas on how to implement some of these things. Next slide. PPRC has created a little bit of a self-audit tool / questionnaire for chemical use, chemical exposure, material efficiency, and waste in metal cleaning and finishing. And I'm going to take you through that a little bit later, but you can see the sections of the tool and the number of questions that are posed in each one of these. Next slide, Jill. Here's a couple more self-assessment checklists. EP Energy Star has energy treasure hunt guides for industrial plants. And in the next screen, I'll show you just a short synopsis of a part of that checklist. But the idea is you put your green team, internal green team together, and you spend a day going on a treasure hunt looking for energy efficiency opportunities. What's great about that is it empowers your employees to start thinking about ways and be more proactive about it. And typically these are showing up with really great end results. And these are links, by the way, so once you get the presentation, hopefully the links will show up. If not, please contact me at any point. California Department of Toxic Substance Control has a metal finishing evaluation checklist. And a number of states have auto body checklists, which I know you're not auto body providers, but the checklist itself will go through something like many different sections, and they often include your hazardous waste management, hazardous waste minimization, and NESHAP 6H, and spray efficiency questions. So some of the sections of these can be useful beyond auto body. Next slide. There's that promised Energy Star checklist. It's a really guided tool that allows you to go through and look at everything together as a team. Next slide. Okay, another thing I use a lot there's so many great resources online, either a fact sheet or a manual or guidance manual, whatever it might be. This one is really great from the Surface Technology Environmental Resource Center. They actually have a webinar about it, but they went through and put all these best practices together, and they actually have a video. This in particular, the one to the right is a plating rack that you can see is quite corroded. So you're losing so much of the plating material in the cracks of the rack itself. And they show the drag out, which is kind of circled. And they talk about how to resolve all of this stuff and how to collect your data. So anyway, it's just a really great resource. Next slide. Oh, here we have Turi again. They just produced this alternatives to halogenated solvents, which is a really great guide. All kinds of great information in there. So those are just two examples I wanted to share. Next slide. Case studies, we talked about that. There are all the ones above are just chock full of, like, 60 case studies, 40 case studies, et cetera, et cetera. And just for the Oregon Roundtable peers, we actually compiled the relevant case studies that are pertinent to metal industry from the above sources. I actually have not gone in and looked at the more recent internship programs like MinTap and Oregon DEQ have these internship programs, and so I think I have the case studies in there up through 2021, so, or maybe 2020, so it'd be good for me to go in and add 21 and 22. But the next slide shows this spreadsheet that I put together with all of those case studies, so you can just do Control F to find something to see if it's salient to you. But we talk about the products and the processes, the summary, and I added all any data that they had on the savings in water, energy, chemical, and hazardous waste.
And just to the point about these links, they are going to be live in the PDF of the slides that's sent out to you. So all these resources will be a nice click away for you. And I'll highlight that Oregon case study list that Michelle was just mentioning in that follow-up email, so it'll be easy to find at the top.
Okay, process mapping is fabulous, a fabulous tool, especially for green teams. It's really a great group exercise to put something like this together. You can add your inputs and outputs. It makes it even more relevant. Then you can brainstorm with your green teams to figure out, well, what opportunities do we have here for reduction? What's our focus? And then the P2, the yellow Kaizen burst, I'll call it, that's stolen from lean technology, is, you put those on the map wherever you identify an opportunity area, and you figure out how to work it. Next slide. You can also go and do like a water balance or an energy balance or a material balance of some sort. Maybe it's your paint use or solvent use or something. And so just gathering that data and then putting it in on a process map is also helpful. Use that green team to figure out alternatives or ways to reduce. And next slide. So putting that into action, this is an actual case study from Romac Industries. They do passivation as one part of their process. So the current state is they show the 5 tanks and how the bath flow goes, and then where the hazardous waste is generated at each stage. So they work together. They actually worked with a consultant. They came up with the future state, and then they implemented it. So by adding that, getting the makeup water added intermittently rather than a whole container or whole tank clean out every 6 weeks, they were able to reduce their drag out and reduce their evaporation. So anyway, the end story here is they reduced their wastewater by 50%, they increased production, reduced bath variability, and reduced their acid use. So the diagrams are just really helpful for figuring out how to solve some of these challenges in the workplace. Next slide.
Hey, Michelle, I had a quick question. So for a project like this, how much time goes into kind of that getting every stakeholder to help map this out and then try these different alternatives? I'm just curious, a project like this, how much time did it take? Are you familiar?
Oh, I'm not sure how much time this one took, and it also depends. They actually had a lean practitioner in as well, lean manufacturing. So when you do that, they typically want to take you through a day or 2 of lean training. So, but then once a walkthrough was typically done in a day, and then you can gather your data, and that may be another half day's worth of effort to get all the data that you need, and then you have these several meetings with the the stakeholders, the green team, the consultant or technical assistance provider, if that's who it is, and come up with your future state. So that might be, a couple hours, and then you kind of got to vet that whole situation a little bit. So I don't know, but hopefully that is helpful. And then implementation, that's dependent on whatever it is that you decide to change.
Sure.
So
Sure.
hopefully that is helpful.
Yeah, sometimes you can't
I
tell if this took 2 years to put together or someone did this in a month, I guess, that kind of ballpark when you look at that kind of effort.
About 4 to 5 weeks.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Okay, I'll just quickly go through some of these, a couple of these tools. So go ahead, Jill. Thank you. So I know safety data sheets, everybody typically probably is just, oh, we have a copy, it's in our notebook, but do people typically, go in and actually read it and look at what hazards do we need to be aware of for exposure, for PPE, and how dangerous or harmful can these chemicals be? So I always take a look at section 2 of the SDS and category 1 and 2. These are from the globally harmonized system of class, the GHS for short.
GHS.
Category 1 and 2, those are kind of, the high, well, category 1 is the highest concern. And then you'll see 1A, and 1A is higher than 1B, etc. So trying to, reduce the number of category 1s and 2s in your arsenal or your chemical inventory is good. And then another way the section 2 will present the data is hazard phrases. And I'm sorry, I don't know what H223 is, but you just look up hazard phrases on the internet and you'll get a whole definition of a list of these hazards. So 2 different ways of presenting the information on an SDS. Section 9 is always important, tells you volatility. Of course, we like to always reduce the use of volatiles. So it gives you the pH and the flammability and etc. And of course, section 8, your exposure and controls. And of course, your EHS people are far more versed in this than I am. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just a quick snapshot of the green screen output. And this is actually a list translator output because it's a formal green screen has not been done. You can see there's some data gaps in some of these cells. So if you look under group 1 human, for instance, C stands for cancer, M stands for mutagen, E is endocrine, but once you understand all of these hazard endpoints, like AA, if you go to ecotox, that's aquatic toxicity, and under fate, B is bioaccumulative, P is persistent, and physical, F is flammability. But once you know those hazard endpoints, you can take a quick look at this this output model, and a lot of these places, or a lot of the tools will use very similar color schemes. Red, of course, is really bad. Orange and yellow are cautionary, and green is good. So you can look at specific endpoints and try to understand how worrisome a particular chemical ingredient might be. So when I say list translator, that I don't want to belabor it, but that means a formal green screen has not actually been done. And if it was done, all of these data, all of these cells would be completely filled in. So the white you can see is a data gap, and the list translator has not been done by a professional, but like the green screen assessment has been done. But anyway, it's clearly this list translator output gives us an idea that we don't want to, or we need to be really careful. We're going to use this Stoddard solvent in our facility. I'm trying to breeze through that because we can get into the weeds on this one, and I'm happy to explain to anybody in more detail if they're interested. And the second diagram is from that TURI resource that I listed earlier. So the halogenated solvent alternatives guide. And you can see acute human effects very high for 3 of the solvents, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a little simpler way to present the data. I find these tools very helpful because you can quickly, at a glance, usually find out things that you don't want to or you need to want to be very careful of. So, okay, next slide.
Does that Turi tool use green screen and list translator for the data source for those?
I believe they
Classifications?
use that, and possibly they may be using ChemHat.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's probably a bunch of different sources.
Combo. Mhm.
And here's ChemHat, which Jill will talk about. That's our exercise, and I won't go any further because we're running out of time anyway. Next slide. This you might be interested in this one, Cleaner Solutions Database. It's another Turi tool. And so your required field is the solvent. Actually, this is the screen to the right, or the little screenshot to the right is I clicked on replace a solvent. So you pick your solvent or something like your current solvent. You don't have to put in the optional fields, but you can. But I'll show you the output on the next slide. So here's the output from this one. So I put in acetone as my current solvent. And 475 records show up. I have, if you look under the refine your search by safety evaluation, you see the safety rankings. And sorry if the type is too small, but like the first alternative is a 5.3, I believe. So that's a medium concern. Between 4 to 6 is medium concern. And so for every chemical in here, you receive that safety score. And then you also can see what process, if you were to switch to this first one, the application is immersion and soaking. And then also they've done efficacy testing on these, so you can see if it's passed the efficacy test or not. So I find it a great tool, and I think I don't know how many different products are in here, but a lot, obviously, because there's 475 just for acetone alone. And they all should have the ranks on efficacy and safety. So next slide. Oh, also, I wanted to mention green screen just really quick is they're starting to do products instead of just the ingredient level. They're actually doing these screenings and vettings for products, and one of them is for cleaning and degreasing of electronics parts. And I can share that link if anybody's interested. Okay, technical assistance. There's Energy Efficiency Center in Oregon and Energy Trust, who they do free audits and analysis, come up with a great recommendation report for you, and a very good cost benefit analysis too. So I wouldn't hesitate if you have any interest in energy efficiency and don't have the in-house expertise. They're great resources. The implementation is on you though, and they'll assist with implementation, but the costs are on you. But they're also very well versed in any kind of rebates, incentives, etc. for money saving. If you want a pollution prevention focus for technical assistance, we talked about DEQ and PPRC. The POTWs for water and wastewater, lean practitioners, and then green certification programs such as EcoBiz, if you're familiar with it. But these are more, and that EcoBiz is in certain areas of Oregon, and EnviroStars is in Washington. But these are more commonly for service sector industries like auto repair and restaurants or what have you. Okay, next slide, please. So I want to quickly walk through some examples. So when we do a walkthrough, we try to go through the whole entire facility, and we're looking for all kinds of things. And the benefit to having us in there is we're a different set of eyes than what the employees are seeing every day on the floor, and kind of desensitized to maybe kind of not paying attention, because this is how we always do things. Anyway, so we look for all kinds of things. I just want to play this video of this drag out situation right here. Underneath the sky is a trough, but you can see that amount of drag out in the trough that's capturing that. There's probably better ways to arrange your layout and possibly hanging the parts a little bit longer. You know, so we try to watch people's operations as well as just looking at pictures. This engine rebuilder is one of the case studies I'll mention. Clearly, they need a better way to capture oil from the parts that are going down their conveyor. This drain board is at the wrong angle, so they're dragging out over electronic controls, plus it's dripping onto the floor. Next slide. Okay, we offer, PBRC has spray training efficiency, but one of the things we look for when we're walking through is we try to always, if there's a spray booth of any kind, we always try to look at how they're spraying. The picture on the left, ergonomics are terrible. This spray pattern is pretty much, you can see most of the paint's going to the floor. The second one, we have an angle like way to the side when technique is so important for spray efficiency. It should be perpendicular to the material itself. The slide to the right, upper right, is the part is actually about the size of my thumb, but he's spraying a clear lacquer, and you can see the spray pattern. Like there's so much spray that more spray than the part itself, it seems like. A shower stall insulation, fiberglass insulation being sprayed down below. The guy's waiting and overspraying. That's so much wasted material. So these are things we kind of look at as we go through this. And I'll, next slide, Jill, is just a quick, oh, shoot, maybe I forgot the video, but that's okay. We also,
I think it's on the next slide.
oh, that's okay.
Here we go.
Okay, we can go backwards, yeah.
Sorry, I think that gets
So
really
it's
fun.
the spray pattern, and I mean, he's spraying more in the air than, and you know, some of it is still depositing on the product, but yeah, it's just, there's so many things about spray, the atomization, the pressure, the grounding, and etc. So we have trainers that can come in, and we have free training sessions, and they also cover NESHAP 6H requirements. So that's enough for that one. You get the idea. There's better ways to spray. We also ask about build efficiency. If I go in on a walkthrough, I can't measure this at any given time, but if hopefully painters or platers or fiberglass sprayers are actually measuring this, the thickness, the build thickness on the part. So I've tried to illustrate it above, where you know, here's the spec range of what you need on your product, and sometimes you're over and sometimes you're under. And when you're over, you're obviously wasting material. When you're under, you could be you know, compromising quality of the end product. And in the example of the bathtub fiberglass, the spec was plus or minus 0.2 inch variation on the whatever I can't remember if it was like a ½ inch thick or whatever. And we would see a very significant amount of variation as we measured it. That was not a walkthrough, that was actually the implementation side. Okay, next slide. We have an infrared camera I usually bring on all my walkthroughs, so I can look at temperatures and see if boilers need more insulation or whatever it might be. We look for wasted resources. Top left, we had the hot water just constantly running down a drain, and I can actually measure, kind of pseudo accurately measure the heat of that water with the infrared gun or camera. Here we have an heated agitating tank open to the air, so there's a lot of evaporation and heat loss there. At a brewery, we had a lunch break, and the conveyor continued to idle through the entire lunch break. So these are the things that I'm just trying to show examples of things we see on the walkthroughs. Okay, next slide. So once we do these walkthroughs, we typically provide a report, and then we work with the company to try to do some implementation. And this is not a wood manufacturer, I know, but Woodfold Manufacturing in Hillsborough, they were very, it was just a great case study, and they really dug in. We got new filter systems in their air booths or their paint booths. They were wasting up about 2 inches of paint at the bottom of their pans because the paint mixtures, because they couldn't get the paint to come out with the existing equipment that they had. Paint transfer efficiency improvements after their trainings. You can see the results from that. We found a PVC scrap. We found a use for that. We helped them revise their purging protocol for purging the guns, the spray paint guns. And then we had, because of that, they had less evaporation to do of their wastewater, their paint cleaning wastewater. So that summarizes the savings for that one. And then the next slide, next case study is another walkthrough, and we continue to work with this company for about a year, mostly virtually after the walkthrough. But we found that their tub washer, their tote washer, which carried these engines that were very greasy and dirty, and they had this big washer. You can see it kind of behind the tub there. We found them that was 5% of their energy use. So we worked on insulation for that, found a safer, cleaner. They changed from some of their aerosol use to these plunger cans. We reduced their use of individual spray paint cans. They improved the efficiency of their spray welder, avoiding 600 pounds of welding wire. Compressed air leak detection and repair. The energy side actually was, our recommendation was simply to have the utility come in and do a comprehensive walkthrough with them. And so they found 47 opportunities, mostly low hanging fruit. And you can see they're saving $15,000 a year in energy. So we try to really take a comprehensive look, and I hope that these examples show you a little bit of that comprehension that we try to really look at everything. Things we might ask about in metal finishing, other things we'd look into is coolant longevity, metal working fluids, are they hazardous wastes? Is there availability to be recycled? Could you change to a different metal working fluid if it could be recycled? Solvent reduction, solvent alternatives, solvent distillation, and any number of other things. Okay, next slide. I think I'm about done. I'm actually not gonna, okay, this is I won't take you here because in the interest of time, but this is our tool. I'd love for everybody to go and answer all of the questions or any that apply to you. So if you're a metal finisher, but not a powder coater, you don't have to answer the powder coating question. So there's the QR code. It's just in Google Forms. I have a vision and hope to make it a more true self-assessment tool where it would pop out answers based on your questions. But for now, I have to provide those answers to you if you, or not answers, but like typical opportunity areas based on your answers. So I urge you to go check that out, please. It'd be great. Next slide shows you just the Google form type questions. They're just super quick, multiple choice type things. And final slide is, that's it. I'm rushing a little bit because I know we were on to end 11:30. So thank you. Questions, or Jill, do you have time do we want to still do the chem hat?
Yeah, so we had a little minute here to kind of, get some feedback from folks who are joining us about their experience with technical assistance. And, I'd love to keep this conversation going. We also have an example to try out using ChemHat really briefly. So I think we can squeeze in a version of it that'll be really short, but I just want to take a brief moment and see if we have any questions for Michelle about the tools or technical assistance that she has provided, or about an opportunity you see for technical assistance. And as a reminder, there's going to be a link in the evaluation to request technical assistance. So if you're seeing things here that are kind of bringing things to mind for you, there's an opportunity to get this kind of help as well. So any questions or thoughts on technical assistance at this time? Okay, so we're gonna very quickly go back to ChemHat to kind of talk about how this can work for you. So in an interest of time, if you would like to, I had in the reminder email, I had a reminder to come with a chemical that you might want to be looking at in your workplace for evaluation. So you want to go ahead and open up a browser window to that ChemHat link at the bottom. And we can just take a look at what this output looks like and how it works. So I'm realizing now I need to go ahead and share the other view here. Here we go. So this is the ChemHat look. So you can see at the top there is options for languages. You scroll down, you can put a material name or a cast number available. And so I was just going to show you a couple examples of what this output looks like. So Michelle had a great idea to look at maskent remover in etching. So TCE is something that is used for that kind of use. So I've just popped in TCE and you see that it started to autofill options for TCE as they existed in the database. So you can take a look and choose from that list. And so we've talked about these kind of color schemes. Red means a stronger effect and stronger evidence, whereas gray is a weaker effect and weaker evidence about any of the data points that you see below. And so you can see this listing, it's got what kind of chemical effect, how does this chemical affect my health? The I and this link here will take you to the data sources available to come to these conclusions. So you can get an idea just from this top view about where you stand on these different topics. So acute and chronic effects. And then if it's on a restricted list, that can also be helpful, as we talked about those kind of lists a little bit earlier today. So and they can take you to that restriction information. And then the environmental impact as you keep scrolling down. And then there's a section here that's got safer alternatives available for this chemical. Unfortunately, there aren't always going to be suggestions for safer alternatives here, but this is a spot where that information will be available and take you to an external source for more information. I'll show you an example like that in just one second. And then how will I be exposed as a worker to this chemical? And then what kind of personal protection equipment would be available to deal with this kind of a chemical exposure in the workplace? So these kind of, you can see where as a worker or as an employer, it's really a kind of top-down look on the impact to a worker and their perspective, but also includes that environmental impact that's going to be so key and the data that drives that decision. So, so what I would encourage you to do is that go ahead and open that up and type in that chemical that you've been curious about. So go ahead and give that a shot. And I'm going to, at the same time, look up something that's being used as an alternative to TCE, just so you can kind of get an idea what different looks can look like. So toluene,
Jill,
go ahead, Michelle.
Intervene real quick. The toluene is what was being used
Okay.
As a maskant. And I don't know if TCE actually is used as a mask, but that's okay. This is a great way to look through the.
Sure. I think we're just kind of getting a chance to look at the output for these different chemicals, and then we'll go to the paint stripper example to wrap our time up here. So this is just another look here, and you can see how the difference in effects are available. So this one has some more chronic effects listed. It's also on a restricted list, and then the environmental impacts. And then I just wanted to highlight that these safer alternatives, this is a question we were talking about earlier, find case studies and substitutions as chemicals. So you can follow this link out, and it'll, within this case story database, it carries over that number for searching. So then you can use that to search in this database for those alternatives. So it's something to kind of poke around and take a look at and see if there are alternatives available to the thing that you selected. And that's kind of a good way to kind of explore using this. So the other thing I would recommend while you're exploring alternatives here is, and this will be the last thing we discuss, but I just wanted to briefly show you the what the output differences can look like So this is a comparison of the outputs for methylene chloride and benzyl alcohol as an alternative suggestion. So you can kind of get an idea when you look at these side by side about what the risks are to both human and environmental impact, and see what thing might be on a restricted list or not. So this is kind of a good side by side to do as you're starting to think about alternatives and seeing what alternatives might be available for these different, for this example around paint stripping. So with that, I mean, you can, we're already trying this out as people get a chance to play with ChemHat. Some things to think about, what are you evaluating? What are those impacts for human health and environmental? What's a suggested alternative? How do these ChemHat results compare as you're looking at these different alternatives? And what would be your next steps to evaluate this new alternative if there is one available? So, and that goes back to that framework we started talking about at the beginning about decision-making process. So really breeze through that, but you can see ChemHat, it's pretty user-friendly and not a bad place to get started at one of these tools, very user-friendly. So I know we are out of time. I just wanted to highlight our next roundtable date is going to be September 14th at 2 p.m. And this is going to be putting P2 into action. September is going to be your time to shine. So we are interested in hearing your stories about what impacts these roundtables have had for you. And we want to hear your story. So we're going to be making some phone calls this summer to try to understand how these roundtables have been helpful, how we can continue to make them more helpful, and try to see what kind of impact this sort of work can have and what kind of goals we can set for the future. So definitely keep that date and we'll be in contact, and I will be sending that follow-up email to everyone. It'll probably be tomorrow. That's going to have that case study list, a PDF of the slides with links, active links included, and then we'll include a link audit tool that Michelle was discussing that can help lead to some new opportunities as well. So with that, we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next roundtable in September. Any other comments or questions?
So I'll just chime in super quick. Via, I'm connecting with you on LinkedIn. Thank you. And,
Thank you.
yeah, and I would just say too, if anybody is looking for a chemical alternative and wants to and find something on ChemHat, wants more information about it, or wants us PPRC or DEQ to look further into it, we may know somebody who's already made that switch or interested in it, or we may know more data or have information about performance, etc. So please contact us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a big part of today about that tools and resources is the technical assistance piece. These folks are well versed in what's happening out there and can connect resources and different examples. So again, that in the eval, there'll be an opportunity to make requests around technical assistance if that works for you. Thank you so much, Michelle. We appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today, everybody. We'll stay online for any remaining questions for a few minutes. All right. Thank you.